Hey, what's up guys, it's Nick2. A ton of you guys have been asking me to make a Flurry rogue build, so that is exactly what I am doing today. As you can see in the gameplay, it still absolutely pumps. You can do pretty much all forms of content with this, so if you're somebody that really just enjoys using Flurry as a skill and you're pretty much overusing Twisting Blades, but you still want to play melee rogue, this is definitely going to be the build for you. Towards the end of the video, for those of you that are interested, I'll talk about what I think the positives and negatives are of using Flurry and directly compare it with Twisting Blades. But regardless, the build is still a ton of fun to play with, and surprisingly, it is actually really good. Make sure to follow me on Twitch if you haven't already. I'm going to be streaming a ton, but also today I'm going to be spending pretty much all day and the subsequent days setting up ranged rogue, and I'm also going to be uploading those ranged rogue builds such as penetrating shot and rapid fire, so make sure to subscribe if you haven't already and follow me over on Twitch. Getting into the build, let's first talk about the skills. Obviously this build is also going to be uploaded on my website, so if you want to be able to quickly reference all the legendaries, the skill points, the Paragon Board, etc., make sure to check out the link in the description for the website. So when it comes to the skills, just like any other rogue build, we're going to be using Puncture for the basic skill for the guaranteed vulnerable application on single targets. Obviously Flurry, Dash and Shadow Step for movement, but Shadow Step is also our guaranteed unstoppable, so if we get stunned, we can easily get out of it. Without this, you're going to be a very sad rogue that is crying on the floor, and you get the extra crit chance and the stun, which is pretty nice. And then I went for double imbuement here. You guys already know how much I love Shadow Imbuement. It's very, very good for doing content that's around your level and just absolutely nuking massive packs of mobs. Probably one of the most satisfying rogue skills in the game. And it pairs very nicely with Flurry. You pop Shadow Imbuement and literally the whole map gets deleted. For the other skill, you can kind of play around with whatever you want. I went for Poison Imbuement here. If you really want to do like Shadow Clone, Death Trap, even Poison Trap, even like Concealment or Smoke Grenade, feel free. The reason that I went for Poison Imbuement, which generally I'm not like a huge fan of, but the main reason I went for it is that Flurry is good at doing damage in like an AoE. It just hits everything and it does like decent damage. But the problem is when you're fighting like one elite or when you're fighting bosses, the single target damage really just isn't there. So Poison Imbuement is simply just to help with our single target damage, while Shadow Imbuement is just to pair very nicely with Flurry doing insane AoE to just literally one-shot everything. Shadow Clone similarly is very good for doing single target damage, but it's a very long cooldown, and without using Twisting Blades and getting the cooldown reduction, inherently the Shadow Clone cooldown is going to be very long. You could mitigate this by using Preparation, which I do recommend. However, I wanted to use Inner Sight and I wanted to use Poison Imbuement, but feel free to swap Poison Imbuement to Shadow Clone with Preparation. Another thing that you could decide to change is you could use combo points. A lot of people really like using combo points with Flurry, but I think one of the benefits of Flurry is that it's a very relaxed, easy to use playstyle. You can kind of just chill on the couch, play with Flurry, and it's just very chill. I mean, it's just super easy to play with. The second that you add combo points, you start wanting to manage your combo points. You want a basic attack in between. You want to get a bunch of attack speed. It's just annoying. You can increase your damage a pretty good bit with combo points. If you prefer that build or spender playstyle, definitely put on combo points. But Inner Sight, with this build, you pretty much have infinite energy and you never have to worry about it. And I just think that is perfect for the build and the way that you want to play with it. When it comes to the skill tree here, obviously Puncture maxed out, and then we max out Flurry, and then we go for the Flurry heal. This is one of the better parts about Flurry as well, because we're constantly dealing damage to crowd controlled and vulnerable enemies. So you pretty much fully heal anytime you do any damage to anything, and you pair that with Siphoning Strikes. Your healing is through the roof. You press Flurry one time and you heal to full health. It's pretty insane. Get the damage reduction with Sturdy here, pretty mandatory. And then you also have pretty much an indefinite vulnerable application here, because of the way that one of our glyphs works. We just instantly apply vulnerable, and then you're just going to keep chaining that with Flurry, but also our Shadow Imbuement, when it explodes, will also apply vulnerable, so having this here is pretty nice. Advanced Flurry seems really good for stunning enemies if you want to go like a dash playstyle where you constantly are pressing your evade button to then stun enemies. In theory, it's really good. The problem is it's just very cumbersome to play, but you could take advantage of this with like damage versus stun and stuff, whatever. I like giving you guys options, but a lot of people in the comments are always like, stop talking about the different options, just talk about what it is. But I like giving people the options if they want to play around with it. You know, that's what's fun about these games, whatever. Shadow Step for the crit, 3 points into Weapon Mastery for damage, 1 point into Concussive so that we can get Trick Attacks, which pairs with one of our Legendaries, so we can pretty much permanently CC certain enemies. Dash for the Enhanced Dash crit debuff, and also the Dash Slow, which is great for a crowd control application. And then 3 points into Exploit, and 3 points into Malice. And then I went 1 point into Shadow Imbuement, and then to level it up, I am not going for consuming shadows with this build, although I usually pair that with shadow imbuement because I have enough energy generation. I instead put a lot of these points into poison related stuff to get additional attack speed to pair with our poison imbuement, and also to make us take less damage against enemies that are poisoned. However, the uptime on this is not great, and as you can see, I'm spending 5 points doing this. So if you would instead like to have the extra energy generation, if you feel like that is lacking, simply just take the 3 points out of debilitating toxins and put it in here. Then we went for the poison imbuement. Mine is rank 5 because I have it on my helmet here. And then you go for the crits with poison imbued skills. Actually deal increased damage, so you get a little bit of benefit from extra crit chance. Poison imbuement, honestly, I think is really weak and probably could use a buff, but it's probably one of the better things to use with this build. I see a lot of people using cold imbuement. Feel free, I guess, but I do not think that it's worth it. I have 3 points, actually 6 into Frigid Finesse because of my amulet. The reason for Frigid Finesse is because I'm using the Penitent Greaves, so we are always applying chill, so that is just a lot of extra damage. And then Precision Imbuement is pretty nice with the Poison Imbuement just so that we get extra crit chance, so I don't mind that at all. And then 3 points into Innervation for the additional energy, and then I have 1 point into Adrenaline Rush, and then 3 into Haste for the extra attack speed. If you want more survivability, your key passive can be Momentum for 20% damage reduction and some movement speed, but close quarters combat is unbelievably insane. This gives you 20% attack speed and 20% increased multiplicative damage against crowd-controlled enemies at all times, and this build needs as much damage as it can get because Flurry is a little bit on the weaker side. You have this buff active pretty much all the time as long as you just make sure to weave in a puncture here and there, like every 8 seconds or so, and then your Flurry is a cutthroat skill anyway, so you gain both of these benefits all of the time. When it comes to our legendaries, my character at the moment is scuffed because it costs a ridiculous amount of gold to swap stuff around, but also I'm preparing to do the ranged rogue build, and I don't have multiple aspects that I want to swap between, so I'm waiting to keep my aspect to put it on different pieces of gear, and I'm also waiting to swap different pieces of gear. The reason that I say all this is that you don't want to copy paste my gear that you're going to see in this video. Check the website instead because that will give you a better representation of what you actually want to use. What I'm using currently is a little bit scuffed. In terms of legendaries that are mandatory, the Flurry one I decided to put on my two-hander so that it just deals 30% increased damage all the time, so I think that is particularly good. Another mandatory one is Vengeful, giving you 9% crit chance pretty much all the time. That's fantastic. And then we have the crits increase your attack speed by 21%. The attack speed feels fantastic. That's really good. We also have the dealing direct damage to a vulnerable enemy has a chance to daze them. Flurry's lucky hit chance is 10%, but it's times 4, so it's 40%. So you actually daze enemies quite a lot. And whenever you daze them, if you then crit them afterwards, you're going to knock them down. So we get a lot of CC with this because it's AoE. So you walk into a pack, boom, pop a Flurry down, and pretty much everything gets dazed, so that is fantastic. We have cheats for 15% less damage, but that goes up to 25% from crowd-controlled enemies, and you are permanently crowd-controlling if you have the Penitent Greaves, but the daze is also an okay application of crowd control. We have Aspect of Might here. Mine is a minimum roll, but you want to get this at max roll, so basic skills being your puncture gives you 20% damage reduction, which is huge. On the amulet, I went for Disobedience. However, you could actually swap this off of the amulet and put it on your pants. My pants are Temerity, but ultimately, I don't think you want to use Temerity. We'll talk about that more when I talk about the pants, but I would put Disobedience on the pants or the chest or the helmet as one of your defensive things. This literally gives you armor cap, which is just a ton of damage reduction. And alternatively here on the amulet, I would actually either go for Shadow Step has 2 charges, because 2 charges is really nice for just having the Unstoppable here. I've only looted this thing 1 time. It's very hard to get for some reason. So if you don't have it, I would do Edge Masters, put it on the amulet. It's a 30% increased damage based on how much resource you have, which is very, very strong. Or you could just put Edge Masters on your other ring. I have conceded because I'm using Temerity, but I do think that for this build, you do not want to use Temerity, which we'll talk about when we talk about the gear rolls, which we'll start off with right now with the helmet. On the helmet, you want cooldown reduction, mandatory, and then it's possible to get +4 ranks to Poison Imbuement and +4 ranks to Shadow Imbuement. Since we're using both, that's going to be our best bet. And then we either want max HP, because that's really good, or you want armor for just straight up damage reduction, or you want dexterity for a little bit of extra damage. My helmet, I'm pretty happy with. If I could roll the all stats to Shadow Imbuement, that would be good, but I spent like 5 million on this helmet. I think I'd rather not spend any more. On the chest piece, you want total armor, damage reduction, and damage reduction from close enemies, and then instead of the cutthroat skill damage, you want maximum HP. Your chest is your defensive big boy. This will just help you a ton. Alternatively, you could also get damage reduction from distant. That's going to be your best bet. Again, check the website for a full BIS list and a full priority list on the stats. When it comes to your gloves, these are incredibly important. You want at the very least +4 ranks to Flurry, and then you want crit chance. Outside of that, you can get all stats, dexterity, or attack speed. That's going to be your best bet, but make sure you get the ranks to Flurry. That is insane. On the pants, I'm using Temerity, but I do not recommend you use these because for this build in particularly, imbuement skill cooldown reduction is very important, but you can also get just straight up damage reduction on the pants, damage reduction from distant and from close, and while injured, and max life, so you're just missing out on a lot of survivability by using Temerity. You do heal up a ton using Flurry, so the uptime on the barrier is actually going to be really good, but the stats on Temerity are just pretty bad, and the fact that you can get upwards of like 14% imbuement skill cooldown reduction on your pants is really good because this build is lacking cooldown reduction. My Shadow Imbuement is already 10.6 seconds, but if this was leveled up, it would be significantly lower, and that would just feel really nice. For the boots, you want Penitent Greaves. If you don't have these, put the Shadow Step thing on the boots instead, and you could get like movement speed and energy cost reduction. Those are some pretty good rolls, but the boots just give you a guaranteed crowd control all the time, and you deal extra damage to enemies that are chilled. I think it's pretty much mandatory for any rogue build. The main thing that rogues actually lack is consistent crowd control effectiveness, so the boots pretty much make up for that. When it comes to the crossbow, you want to use a crossbow because it's always going to roll with the vulnerable damage inherent, and then you want crit damage, damage to close, vulnerable, and dexterity. I have pretty much a god tier like GG crossbow. This thing is pretty much exactly what you want it to be. The item power could be a little higher, a couple rolls could be a little bit better, but I think this is pretty much what you want to look out for. And then you want similar stats on your one-handers. You want to be using swords because swords take advantage of weapon mastery. Swords always roll with critical strike damage inherent. And then outside of that, you want crit damage, dexterity, vulnerable damage, and then either damage to close or core skill damage. That's what you want to look out for. Damage to chilled or CC is okay, but anything that's conditional is generally just worse, and you'd rather have these other stats that are on their own multiplier anyway. Same thing for the rings. This ring is unbelievably trash, and I hate it, but it is the only ring I've ever looted, or I made the mistake of putting a +4 umbral on this ring, because I thought that I would loot more of them. But regardless, you want crit chance as high as possible. That's the most important thing on your ring, because it's very hard to get crit in this game. Crit damage, and then vulnerable damage, and the last thing can be like damage to close, damage with core skills, or even max life is good for the survivability. The amulet is very hard to get a good one of. I would recommend getting at the very minimum cooldown reduction plus one rank or plus a rank to some of the good passives here. I went for Frigid Finesse, but I don't really like that because it's conditional. It's just the best neck that I have. The best thing you could get would be Weapon Mastery because it's just 9% increased damage, or you could get Malice. Do not get Exploit. Don't recommend Exploit. It's good for damage to healthy, but I don't really like that. I would rather just have straight up damage, so look out for Malice. Look out for Weapon Mastery. Try to get the cooldown reduction there. I actually have a really good one in my bags. Here it is, this one. 2 ranks to Malice, but if you upgrade it gets more. And this has flat damage reduction on it, which is really good on the amulet. Armor is fantastic. I was trying to get this trap skill cooldown to be normal cooldown reduction, and that's what I was going to use for this video, but it's very hard. But mine also has 19% damage reduction from close, which is a pretty insane number. And you could also get like percentage dexterity, but there's so much defensive stuff to be had on the amulet. I would try to just get the 2 offensive things, being the passive, the cooldown reduction, and then get the damage reduction, pretty much any source that you can, because that's going to be really good for you. When it comes to Paragon Board, again, this is on the website. How you want to level up with it is different than how you want it to be at level 100, and I also may optimize this more in the future. If you are leveling up, you want your first board to be the No Witness board, and then you omit No Witness because we're not using an ult skill, and you just want to unlock Exploit as soon as humanly possible. The reason you do the No Witness board first is because it has a lot of strength in it, so you can unlock Exploit, the additional bonus with a level 1 version of Exploit, because it's a guaranteed vulnerable application, which is unbelievably busted, so get this as soon as humanly possible. But on the level 100 board, I went for Exploit Weakness as my first board, and then I socketed in Control. If you do not have the Penitent Greaves, Control is pretty much useless for you. Instead, you would rather use, I believe it is called Chip, for just extra damage, although Chip I think is pretty weak. Regardless, that's my first board. My second board, I went for Cheap Shot. There's a lot of fantastic nodes on here. Cheap Shot, again, is pretty much mandatory to use with the boots. If you don't have the boots, Cheap Shot is pretty bad, and you'd rather just instantly get the glyph. and then get like the damage to healthy down here, but there's a ton of damage to crowd controlled, which is just actually phenomenal. And then there's even more damage to crowd controlled up here, crit damage to crowd controlled, and 25% extra damage is up a lot of the time with the pendant degrees. So get the boots, man. Without the boots, you see that you're missing like 100% damage if you don't have the boots. It's really sad, and blame Blizzard for not giving Rogue enough crowd control. Okay, when it comes to the next board, I went for Tricks of the Trade. I actually spec'd into this right now and I was testing it, but I don't recommend this. It's better to spend these points elsewhere. Tricks of the Trade is good if you're playing with combo points and then you're playing with like the Legendary Expectant, where basic skills give you more stacking damage. If you're not playing combo points, this is not up enough and you'd rather just spend all these points that I spent here just getting straight up damage. So again, reference the Paragon board on my website, but I went for this board because I get turf, damage to close is pretty nice, but I mainly want the damage reduction here. That's great. This board just has a lot of good nodes. You can get damage to close and damage reduction from close. If you're feeling like a lack of survivability, get these two nodes here for the damage reduction. And then I went for crit damage up here, which is fantastic. And I have enough int to get the extra crit damage here. So this is a lot of crit damage, just straight up extra damage, which I'm a huge fan of. And then in this board, you can get exploit, and then you can also get a good amount of damage to healthy, crit damage, etc. And just straight up damage. And you can level up your exploit glyph pretty easily. One of the reasons, I forgot to mention this, but the exploit weakness glyph, board has a lot of really crazy stuff on it. I ended up in the board that's on my website going for the damage to elites here, which I think is perfect because Flurry has a huge problem fighting elites. So if you can get all this damage to elites, that's massive there. And then you can also get a ton of vulnerable damage here. So that is particularly good. I may consider swapping this board and putting it up top because we get these rare nodes very easily because it's just a dexterity requirement. And then moving this board down so that we can get the int requirement here on the extra damage to healthy, but that's like an incredibly minor optimization. For you guys some gameplay of the build in a nightmare dungeon that I have from my Twitch stream, but first I want to talk about Flurry versus Twisting Blades. So Flurry is worse than Twisting Blades, objectively. The reason for that is that, as you can see, my Flurry is rank 9, and it does 108% of my weapon damage in total. And then it does an extra 30% with my legendary, okay? So let's say it does like 140% of my weapon damage. It doesn't really calculate like that. Whatever, let's just compare the base number, okay? 108% weapon damage, that's how much Flurry does in total. Twisting Blades at rank 0 does 45% damage to the main target, and then 72% damage to the main target as well, and then 72% damage to every enemy that it pierces through, and the main target takes 8% multiplicative increased damage, which works way better for a lot of these other sources. So already, if you're fighting one target, a rank 0 Twisting Blades does more damage than my rank 9 Flurry. And then, when you take into account the fact that the Twisting Blades legendary makes Twisting Blades have the orbiting effect, which gives it AoE, which is basically what it lacks in the first place, is not very good AoE. It gives it the AoE for free, and then when you're on a single target, the Twisting Blades that orbit around you deal 30% of the return damage of Twisting Blades, but that 30% happens 5 times per orbit because there's multiple blades. They go like this, shing, 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 so it does 5 instances of damage. That's 150% damage of the return damage. Remember, the return damage is 72% on a rank 0. That gets way higher if you have a rank 9, and this does 30% of it times 5. So Twisting Blades on one mob does about 3 times the damage of Flurry, and all that Flurry gets to show for it is that it hits enemies in an AoE, and it does mid damage, and you get the heal. When it comes to the benefits of Flurry, I'll start showing some gameplay now and just talk about it. The benefits of Flurry is that it is way easier to play with, okay? It's super easy to play with. You get the heal baked in. You can just, like I was saying earlier, chill on the couch with the controller. If you don't want to like try hard sweat it up, Flurry is the perfect skill for you. Twisting Blades is more of like a try hard thing, but it just does a crazy amount of damage, man. I mean, the damage of Twisting Blades is like not even comparable to Flurry. Obviously, as you can see in the gameplay, Flurry works, but when I have to fight single target mobs like these skeletal things, I do like no damage, and there's not really much that I can do about that other than like putting on Shadow Clone or something, but that's what I have Poison Imbuement for, just for more consistency. And the damage of Flurry just is really weak, and also you don't get the cooldown reduction that Twisting Blades has. So obviously, you can see in the gameplay, you can use Flurry, it's still good, it's just not nearly as good as Twisting Blades, and that is my opinion, but feel free to use it if you prefer. that's going to be it for the video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and enjoy the gameplay. Do I get the conduit? What is it? Blast conduit? No, help. Help. Gonna stand in it. GG. The blast conduit carry, man. Why am I calling it a conduit shrine? No, not the levers. You know, my homies hate the levers, man. What the heck? Oh, really? You had to throw your poop at me? That's messed up. That is actually foul of you. Should I be pushing high nightmare dungeons? No. Unless you are a masochist, then I mean, I guess. Or if you just want, you know, a challenge. So yeah, a masochist. But, those are quite tanky. There's no reward incentive to push, so. It'd be cool if there was. Obviously just complained about that in my video, so I'll try not to just repeat myself all day. All day, day. The skeletal things are really tanky because Flurry single target is quite garbanzo. But otherwise you kind of blast through it decently, I guess. One more. Not too bad. No more poop on me, please. Pretty quick dungeon. Anything good? Ooh, imbuement skill cooldown, but everything else on it sucks. I don't even know what to level up anymore. Maybe ambush for when I play trap.